Karma Cut by Jay Wilburn. Katie Carnes laid on her bedroom carpet with her head turned to the side. Without the pigtails, she could see perfectly under her bed, where the unnatural light poured up and out of the portal that had opened under there. She was 7 years old now, and too old for pigtails, she had decided. Flat on the floor, she could also see that her room needed vacuuming. The particles of dust, dirt, and shredded leaves sucked up under the bed as all the storage boxes of clothes too small for her and toys too young for her vanished into another dimension. This was the cleanest the space under her bed had ever been, but something else was coming out of the portal. The suction from whatever was on the other side of that strange light was not enough to clean her entire floor, not really. That was probably good because she didn't want her entire bed to disappear. The light pink comforter had slipped a little, but didn't fall into the portal. She wanted to reach out and flip it up safely onto her bed, but she was afraid to get that close. As she waited for the things beyond the portal to arrive this time, she thought she should probably vacuum her floor soon for real. Mom hadn't asked her to, but of course she was busy with Katie's sister Steph, who was still sick. Dad was busy working. He had to work longer hours to pay for Steph being sick. Katie would have to pick a moment when the noise from the vacuum wouldn't disturb Steph's rest or irritate Dad after a long day or get on Mom's last nerve. There weren't many times when all of those things could be avoided. Steph needed help. Their parents wouldn't say it in front of the girls, but Katie could hear them talking quietly and nervously at night. Steph was in trouble. They were running out of time and had no answers. Steph was 2 years older than Katie, but still smaller, and she was in real trouble. April was an adult and a half-sister to both of them from Dad's first marriage. She had already moved out of the house and married Donnie. Katie could call April. She was loud. She'd almost done it 3 times since the portal started, but chickened out each time. How do you even convince a person that such a thing was real, much less ask if they should keep opening them? Katie felt she might be in real trouble. In real trouble all her own. Alright, I've already made a correction. Okay. The items lifted out of the portal as if levitating from the floor itself, and then the light vanished with the pop. Katie waited a moment longer before she reached under for the handle of what appeared to be a violin case. It had never happened before, but she feared the portal might be trying to trick her. If not the portal, then whatever moved objects from in and out of it on the other side. Katie had thought about playing the violin. She was old enough to start. Her friend Brianna started 2 years earlier, but it was expensive, and Katie's parents thought she might not stick with it the way she did with many things. She pulled the case out without the trans-dimensional passage opening again. The case had 2 clasps that were worn away and chipped. The hard cover of the case folded open smoothly on its hinges. The inside was lined with thick, bright red felt. It was very soft and smooth, almost like fur, and it supported a very dangerous-looking weapon. It had multiple barrels, blades snapped on at various spots, and a large trigger. She snapped the violin case back closed and slid it under her bed again. What was she ever going to do with that? How was she ever going to explain it when it was inevitably discovered one day? She needed to throw the whole thing away at some point, but carrying it even that far felt dangerous. She probably shouldn't have reached far enough to touch the felt inside. She slid out a leather suitcase that barely fit in the space under the bed. Inside it was completely full of buttons, like the kind that were sewn onto shirts, but these were all loose. Most were round, but not all. Most were shiny, and the mix of colors and shades was dazzling. There had to be thousands upon thousands of them packed into that suitcase. Unless there was something underneath all of them, there was not a thing here that could help. Still, she was fascinated by all those buttons delivered to her from some other world. She ran her fingers through them, listening to them click together, but they were wet. She lifted her fingers away, and the tips were red. It could have been paint, but she didn't think so. Katie wiped her hand off on the carpet before really thinking about it. Then she tried to wipe that up in a frantic effort to avoid a stain. She just ended up smearing her carpet into what looked like a pink juice spill. Probably less trouble than her parents thinking it was a blood stain, but still trouble she didn't want. There was far more than enough trouble in the Carnes house already. If she hurried, she might get water or some other cleaner on it before it set, but she was occupied at the time. She closed the suitcase of bloody buttons and shoved it back under her bed. Many of the rest of the items were round. They contained old hats of various sizes. She didn't dare to wear any of them, but they seemed ordinary. Some smelled of mothballs, others stunk of fresh sweat. They looked like hats from another era. None had blood on them. Each went back into their boxes and back under the bed after inspection. The final item was a jar. It was large. It was bigger than the Karma jar that had a lid with a rubber edging and a fold-down wire latch. She barely reached it with her stained fingertips and managed to roll it out into the light. Something wobbled and bounced inside on the way. Katie lifted the jar slowly, inspecting the dried-up carcass inside. It looked to have been a reptile or an amphibian before it dried up and shriveled in death. There were bony claws sticking out from the rigid flesh of its front feet. Its eyes were solid black and empty. A single tooth showed from behind a curl of lip frozen that way in death. It wasn't a frog, and it wasn't any sort of lizard or salamander she had ever seen. Nothing native to where she lived. Maybe not from anywhere on Earth at all. So who had packed the bags? Who found this creature on whatever world it called home and closed it in an ordinary-looking jar? Where did the weapons come from, and why was there a suitcase full of bloody spare buttons? Did those people or things now have her old clothes and toys that used to be under her bed? What did they want them for? The creature jumped. Its bony claws scraped the inside of the glass. It parted its lips to show sharp yellow teeth and tore the dry flesh around its mouth in the process. Its withered leg muscles tightened again, and it smacked hard against the inside of the lid. After that, it turned its black eyes on her and hissed. She let out a squeak and dropped the jar on the carpet. The carpet was soft, but she still feared the jar might shatter and let this horrible thing out into her room with her. It rolled almost to the bottom edge of her bed, and the thing inside crawled toward the lid with slow, jerky movements. Katie choked on a little of her spit and then shoved the jar the rest of the way under her bed. She could still hear the thing clicking inside. There was definitely going to be a secret trip to the outside trash soon, maybe even a drop-off in the neighbor's trash to get these things farther away from her. Still no answers. Katie turned her attention back to the Karma cup on the built-in shelf near her closed bedroom door. It was an old jar that had a small lid, but this one screwed on. There was a piece of black paper taped inside. It had the title Karma Cup written in a sort of white grease that looked like chalk from a distance. The old Scotch tape, older than Katie by a lot, was turning yellow-brown inside the glass, but it still held the black paper in place, and despite its age, the black paper had not faded at all. This led Katie to believe that the jar really was magic. That and the portals it opened convinced her the magic was real. The coins she had used so far were gathered at the bottom. An old ashtray next to the Karma cup was filled with more coins, waiting for the next experiment. The jar had belonged to her great-grandmother, her mother's grandmother, who ran a soda shop, general store, and laundry all in one. The woman had even done some sewing and woodwork on the side with her first husband. Before she passed, long before Katie was born, long after the store was closed, she had 3 husbands in all, each one dying before she did. This had been the tip jar in the store all those many years ago. Mom had explained the idea of karma as best she could. She did not say anything about magic before allowing Katie to take the jar from the boxes of things they were removing from the attic 2 weeks ago. Surely her mom had no idea. Mom didn't want her crossing the street alone, much less summoning strange weapons or jars of undead creatures from another dimension. Had her great-grandmother known about the magic? Did she create it? Did it get attached to the object sometime later? Still no answers. The ashtray had belonged to her grandfather, her dad's dad, and the last one in the family to smoke. He had died before Katie was born of something called COPD, which meant you couldn't breathe so well after all the smoking. She guessed that the old ashtray that held her change was not the thing with magic. It might have been a combination of the two objects, but she guessed it was mostly the jar. Even her mom had been too young to remember the store, so all the stories she could share about it came from her mother, Katie's grandmother. None of those second-hand stories sounded at all magical. Katie thought about calling April to see as she approached the jar in its place again. She considered talking to Donnie instead. He was cool when he was dating April, very nice to her, Katie, and Steph. Seemed to really listen when others could care less. Dad didn't like him at first, but it was probably just because he was a boy interested in his daughter. Donnie might listen to the story of the portals at least, even if he had trouble believing. Katie thought about talking to Donnie as she lifted a blackened penny from the change in the ashtray. Steph might listen too. She didn't feel good, of course, and didn't like being bothered, but Katie was doing this to try to help her sister. She might have an opinion on whether it was worth the risk. Katie debated talking to Steph as she slowly unscrewed the lid of the karma cup. That left Mom and Dad. Kids were supposed to tell about dangerous things to their parents. Even if it might make them mad, you were still supposed to tell. They cared about Steph as much as Katie did, maybe more. They might understand the risk better, especially if Katie could show them the magic. She considered fessing up to her folks as she dropped the penny into the karma jar and screwed the lid back on as it finished clattering around inside. Katie stepped back quickly and waited. She didn't think it would take long. Of course, she had not run 2 experiments back to back like this close together. She swallowed twice and then spoke out loud to her empty room in a shaky voice. I want something that will make my sister better, make her well again. Katie wasn't sure she remembered Steph ever being well, but she knew she used to be. Like she knew the cup used to belong to her great-grandmother. Like she knew that smoking gave you COPD, and COPD kept you from meeting all your granddaughters. Like she knew April and Donnie had messed around before they were married. Like she knew no one would believe her if she told anyone about this. To a lesser degree, she also felt in her heart that there was something out there beyond the normal world that could help her sister, and this was her only way to reach those other places. Now she just had to keep trying until the karma cup opened a portal that really helped. The next portal started as a pinpoint of light in the corner of her room beside the middle hinge of her bedroom door. It expanded from there, and the strange light started to swirl and to suck. It messed up her hair and pulled a loose strand out from her forehead with its inward-moving breeze. The door rattled in its frame once and then twice. Katie almost called out, thinking it was someone trying to come in at the worst possible moment. But then she realized it was the portal pulling at her door, where it had opened too close. One more rattle, and then the door popped its latch and swung open, concealing the portal's light behind it. She prayed no one would walk down the hall just then. Of course, she had prayed for her sister to get better, and that hadn't worked either. Dad had prayed for Grandpa's breathing, too. That was why she had resorted to this. Nothing went into the portal yet, but something was coming out. It bumped the door a couple times on the way, but the suction kept pulling it back on its hinges. Then the terrible dark arm reached out into her room from behind the door. Katie backed away until the edge of her bed knocked her knees out from under her. Then she shuffled backward across the mattress to the farthest corner and clutched her pink pillow in front of her. She could hear the thing in the jar under her bed still clicking as it looked for a way to escape. The black arm appeared almost burnt, with the flesh puckered up and bulging at different places. The sleeve was pulled up almost to the knobby elbow, almost like a pinstripe suit jacket that had been resting in a closet for 100 years maybe. If the thing that went with the arm had the right kind of head, it might want one of the hats from under her bed. Jagged, broken, discolored nails on the ends of those horrible fingers scraped the hollow wood of her door as the hand delicately tested the knob. Katie thought at first it was trying to turn it. Then she realized it was testing to see if it would come loose. This hand, whatever it was, wherever it was from, and whatever horror it was attached to, was a taking hand. Was there a world of rotten-armed monsters who wore suit jackets but did not know how doorknobs worked? It reached for the shelf next. First, it touched the karma cup. Katie thought it might be taking the magic object away for good. She thought that might be best, but the fingers recoiled. It reached carefully beyond the jar and raked those horrible nails through her loose change. Under the coins, it scraped across the ceramic surface. Katie shivered at the grating noise. Small wisps of ancient cigarette ash wafted up and out of the tray. It still seemed unsatisfied as it stretched a little further and wrapped its digits around a rubber duck that Katie had won somewhere she didn't remember. The duck squeaked and the arm froze in place. It squeezed and made the duck squeak again. Then the arm rushed out of sight, all in one motion, jarred the door with its fat elbow along the way. Katie startled and prayed for the portal to finally close again, but the arm emerged once more. This time it held a much smaller jar than any of the ones before, darker with more curves to it, and a glass stopper instead of a lid. The arm with its prize tested around the shelf for a clear spot. It knocked over one of her wild-haired troll dolls and bumped a small plastic cup onto the floor with a thunk. The cup was a pastel one from the old kitchen playset Katie inherited from April. Steph was too sick to play with it much, so it had been Katie's then. That set was long gone except for this silly cup and a few fake spoons she had forgotten somewhere higher on the shelf. Katie was the youngest, and there was no one left to pass stuff down to. She was too old for it, she had decided. Her parents always said it took up too much space in her room anyway. It was for babies, not big girls. Like pigtails, it was time to move on. You couldn't go on being little forever in a house full of people in trouble. Girls who still played with kitchen sets or wore pigtails were not the kind you could trust with opening portals to other worlds or trying to save a life. That newly cleared spot was where the odd jar that was filled with something dark was finally placed. The awful hand with the horrible nails actually waved to her on the bed. Then it gave a thumbs up, which it held as it slowly retreated back into the portal. She hated that the arm knew she was there. The portal lasted a few more seconds, and then its light extinguished. The room fell silent, and the door swung out a few inches, enough to show Katie that nothing remained behind there, nothing she could see. She sat holding her pillow for a long time. It was finally the clicking from under her bed that convinced her to get up and move. Approaching the new jar, she bent over and stared close to it without touching it. She glanced behind the door from time to time, wondering if the thing that went with the arm could open the portal again. She wanted to look away and forget it for good, but her mind kept telling her that something was moving over there, at the edge of her vision, even if she saw nothing every time she looked straight on for it. The dark substance within the jar was liquid and a deep, inky, purple-black color. It hardly seemed like medicine, but that was sort of what she'd asked for. She finally picked up the jar, but did not dare open it. What now? Give it to Steph? Ask her about it? Get someone to test it? It wasn't like she knew anyone with a lab, and she wasn't sure that a magic cure could show up in any scientific test. Katie took a deep breath and prayed for her sister's safety as she carefully carried the jar up the hall toward her sister's room.